Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yusuf Ismail and the program you're viewing is I Beg to Differ. This is a program which focuses on interactive debate on socio-economic, political, religious, cultural and social issues affecting both South Africans locally and people on an international level. Today we'll look at the issue of corruption. We hear about this all the time. Now, corruption is one word and term that has been endemic in recent years, both in terms of actual practice, in terms of what we see, and certainly been covered in the mainstream media, particularly with regards to the ANC, at the expense of millions of South Africans, poverty-stricken South Africans, and rightfully so. This has been repeatedly called out by the Democratic Alliance in the National Assembly, other opposition parties. But the question we're looking at today is, does the official opposition have the monopoly or integrity to question the corruption within the ANC? And does the ANC indeed have the monopoly on corruption? We have in this discussion attempted to get a senior member of the Democratic Alliance. We've been unsuccessful. Unfortunately, we do have with us in the studio Pokiso Mtemunye, who is the provincial youth leader and member of the provincial executive of the Democratic Alliance. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
We're also joined by Fadil Hussain, who is the founding member of S01. He's a well-known community activist. He's a business consultant. He was involved in an investigation or negotiation with a major bank some years back, and welcome to you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks to both you fine gentlemen. Let me start off with you, Pokiso. Looking at the state of Johannesburg, certainly recently under the leadership of Herman Mashaba, if we look at some of the facts, the city of Johannesburg as it stands now, 42% of the debt to revenue ratio that National Treasury limits to 45% as a debt ceiling. Johannesburg has about 881,000 unemployed people with an unemployment rate over 30%. Under the previous administration, 190,000 people joined the ranks of the unemployed. The stagnant economy growth around 2%, and there's a housing backlog of about 300,000 and an average delivery of only about 3,500 housing units being constructed per year. The figures don't look extremely healthy. Yeah. What's the DA's position on this?
I think the decay and the mismanagement of Johannesburg dates more than at least 20 years since one of the first metro council election in 2001, when the ANC officially took over the running of Johannesburg, up until 2016 when the new administration dislodged the ANC administration. I think historically there's been a lot of decay in the city, and there's been a lot of corruption and non-delivery. As we said, the housing backlog, the challenges of misgovernance within the city is something that the coalition government inherited 2 years ago. And I think the initial strategy was to ensure that we stop the bleeding in that space.
So basically, what you're going to be involved in is damage control.
Yes.
And are you saying that a lot of these factors, the legacy that we see is as a resultant factor of the previous ANC-led provincial municipality?
I think in the main, yes. I mean, there are also some external factors, like Johannesburg is also a migrant city. So there's a lot of people that come in and out, looking for economic opportunities. A lot of people that come outside of South Africa. So there are challenges that you cannot attribute to the government.
Well, let me just.
However, there is a lot in terms of backlogs, in terms of debt levels, in terms of lack of delivery, where a particular administration has control over those factors. That is where we are zoning in to ensure that we turn around Johannesburg to be at least where Cape Town is.
I just want to look at some of these statements, and you could call them probably cliched, in relation to the Western Cape.
Yeah.
This is what some people allege, or what the DA's mantra has been, certainly in the National Assembly. The Western Cape delivers services. The Western Cape is better run than any other province. The Western Cape government is not at all as corrupt as the ANC government. How true do these bear?
It is not us who say that. It's the Auditor General says that. 9 out of the 10 best-run municipalities almost every year, it's either 8 or 9 out of 10 from the Auditor General's report say that. you'll find the least wasteful, fruitless, and irregular expenditure in the Western Cape.
Okay, so I just want to stop you there.
I'm just giving
Yeah,
the
sure.
facts from a neutral.
Okay, so
from a
you're
neutral
saying
perspective. I'm
the
saying the numbers back it up.
Okay, so you're saying this is not just self-praise from the DA, it's the Auditor General. Well, let's look at the first point. The Western Cape delivers services. If you go to Constantia, if you go to Crawford, if you go to Thornton, if you go to Hermanus, you'll see service delivery. If you go to Khayelitsha, if you go to Bonteheuwel, if you go to Mitchell's Plain, if you go to the Cape Flats, there's a total lack of service. You look at the fact of the Western Cape government not as corrupt as the ANC government, or not at all as corrupt.
Yeah.
There's just certain points I want to raise, and then I'll bring you Fadil as well as yourself. There was recently a multi-million rand communications tender, which was awarded to TBWA, Hunt Lascaris, where Helen Zill's, back then, right-hand man called Ryan Kutsia was directly implicated. The public protector was called in to investigate. You had the Eden District Council, where the municipal manager was dismissed initially for gross financial misconduct. He was then reinstated. You fast forward to quite recently, the possible manipulation of the land deal in the DA-run city of Cape Town. Besides that, you have a case of 48 alleged cases of irregular expenditure amounting to 55 million rands, which was identified by the Auditor General. So in light of these allegations, how is it that the DA can claim to hold the moral high ground, particularly when there seems to be something inherently rotten in the Western Cape provincial-run municipality?
I wouldn't agree that is something inherently rotten. I do hear the specific incident that you speak about, without trying to justify them comparatively speaking. You would find a much lower prevalence of such incidents, and the DA has a record of acting on these type of things very quickly. I mean, recently in Tshwane, we just got rid of a chief of staff that was inappropriately appointed very quickly once the revelations were revealed. We're dealing with the Patricia DeLille case. One of the things that came out of
I'm going to come to that.
Yeah, but one of the things that came out of this,
sure.
it was the first time Cape Town gets an unqualified audit in many years.
Yeah.
And it is those type of things that we are seen to be acting a lot of time. We have removed many of our own mayors through motions of no confidence.
So in other words, you're saying
something that is unheard of
you're not immune to corruption. You're not immune to corruption, but you're saying there are steps that are being taken as opposed to the ANC.
We are much more seen to be acting. We just an MMC of finance who had in Johannesburg, who had recently given a tender to people that are close to him. Herman Mashaba got rid of him the day that was revealed, the same day. And he's not back. And he's not back in office. Sure. As you see the turnaround from other parties, where someone exits by one gate and enters by another door in some type of redeployment. I'm saying our ability to act in public is much more seen and much more reputable than anyone else in this country.
Well, Fadil, I just want to come to you on that based on what our learned colleague said here. There's a cliche that if you don't do anything, you won't make a mistake. In other words, when you're doing nothing, you're obviously going to get a clean audit. That's the whole point. But without attempting to be apologetic, there's another particular stating that people in glass houses should be very careful about throwing stones, because with power comes responsibility and possibly huge mistakes. The point being made by Pokiso was that DA is not immune to corruption, but inherently it has steps and I would assume procedural regularities in place in terms of dealing with the corruption. How true do you believe that bodes?
Yusuf, I don't buy in on that. I believe Pogiso is a very good spin doctor for the DA. The DA is not only marred with corruption in terms of the facts that you've highlighted, 48 cases, 55 million rand, Tony Leon, ex-leader of the DA.
I will come to that, certainly.
Okay. I think inherently we need to examine the DA's policies, particularly its foreign policies and their leanings towards, the Zionist, who, as far as I'm concerned, controls the world economy. And that is the heartbeat of corruption. You need to understand that Zionism is not a religion. It's a cult. And it's based primarily on exploitation of human beings, control and that type of things, which really, as far as I'm concerned, the DA throughout its existence has been very much involved with Zionism.
Would you say more so now, or more so in the time of certainly Tony Leon and obviously the Liberal Party before that?
I think more so now, in the sense that they haven't come out very firmly and spoken out against, for example, the Palestinian issue and the occupation of the land grab and so on. They are also in cahoots. Very recently, we've witnessed that they're in cahoots with the Israeli government, trying to infiltrate the South African government and staging 1,000 people, whipping up the emotions in support of Zionism. So the question is, begs here that what does the Zionists want in South Africa with the DA?
Okay, I think that's an important issue. And I'm going to come on to that later in the program, the Zionist so-called conflict. But something that is just more that we just come out through, the so-called water crisis in Cape Town.
Yeah.
Now, do you believe that was manipulated?
Was
there a water crisis in Cape Town?
There was a water crisis in Cape Town.
Where's the evidence of that?
We had the longest, most devastating drought on record. Since the early 1920s, we all know that the people of Cape Town, through the water saving initiatives,
they've lost 6 billion rands.
Their decrease in consumption has allowed us to come back to a better state, and also the improvement of rains and the whole coordination by various actors around that crisis.
This is one issue I want to raise on that particular point. The individuals that were initially running the water crisis communications to the South African public, and particularly to Cape Town citizens, was in fact the DA leader Tony Leon and his former communications director Nick Cleland, through their respective company called Resolve, that was a subcontractor of the city's advertising agencies. I don't know how the tender process worked, but they were appointed directly to contractor to tell the people that there's no water. Tony Leon personally and via the company received something like, through the company Resolve, 650,000 rands by the DA provincial government to tell the people of Cape Town that there's no water. Don't you think that's a grotesque travesty of people's public money?
I think that there are two issues. The first issue...
Well, do you agree that that happened, that did happen? He was paid, the man was paid 650,000 rand to tell people there's no water in Cape Town.
So yes, so that happened. But
so how do we justify that?
Yes, so let me come down to the communication.
Yeah.
So the communication for us was definitely required. Whoever the service provider is will come to that. But the communication in terms of how we deal, how the people are engaged on a daily basis on what's going on in the city in terms of the water crisis was required by the right.
Have a PRO desk. Why do you need to pay somebody almost 750,000 rand to speak the obvious?
And how did they tell you there's a water crisis? Because the farmers had water. The point is that the water restrictions, it's now proven that the city lost something like 6 billion rands as a result of the water restrictions.
Yes.
6 billion rands was lost as a result of individuals adopting water restrictions, despite there being no direct evidence of a drought. Yes, there was no rain. There was no rain for a sustainable, but there was still a water supply. That's the whole point. And here you have a company paid by the DA, 650,000 rand. By the city, paid by the city, which is obviously DA control. That's the whole point. And a man who was formerly the head of the DA. Don't you see the conflict of interest that's there? Because if the ANC was involved, if you reverse the situation, the ANC had one of their former leaders running a company being paid for that, the DA would have made a big scene about it.
So for me, the one issue first that because we're in a crisis situation, the communications was required. The communication on what the restrictions are, what should people do to save water, and to avoid panic and to avoid that crisis going deepening. And sometimes you do get out to external experts who will help you with messaging and help you with the means to get the message across. People do that all the time.
Okay, sure.
That's the one part. Okay. Now, coming to how the former leader got the work, I would under correction, I would assume that there was a very clear process that this was open to the public. And there was declaration. If none of those two happens, then there's an issue.
Okay, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back. I just have to stop both of you. I have to stop both of you. We have to go for a quick ad break. We need to pay our bills. When we be back, we're going to come back to this discussion. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. The program is I Beg to Differ. I'm Yusuf Ismail, and with me in the studio is Pogiso, the youth leader for the Democratic Alliance, as well as a member of the provincial executive, and Fadil Hussain, a noted community activist. So we went on the break, and I think this is quite crucial. On the issue of the water crisis, and we spoke about, you mentioned something about a tender. Doesn't it strike you as quite remarkable that the individual who got the tender and the payment happened to be the DA's, the Democratic Party back then, but the DA's founding leader? Does it not strike you as somewhat odd, and does it not strike you as something that perhaps needs to be looked into, because it's a large amount of money that was used to pay someone, formerly a leader of the DA, to tell people there's no water. So, when there is water, because now the day zero has been extended to 2019.
So I'm saying to you, if the process can prove itself to have been faulty, then there's definitely an issue there. What is important was that has the process been properly followed? Has declarations been made? And did competitors who are at the same level have the same opportunity with the same information? Any of those elements proven wrong, then there's definitely something. There's definitely something to answer for, because our communication is that all of those processes were followed.
Well, what evidence was it that there was a tender process?
No, so also the regulations.
I understand
the regulations say that you cannot go on a work of more than 500,000 without a tender process. So any work above that amount must go to a tender process.
So this company, Resolve Communications, has Tony Leon as its executive director, correct?
Yes.
Who's
not an office bearer?
At this point in time,
yes.
Not an office bearer,
yes.
but certainly didn't it seem as inherently problematic, the fact that someone who was formerly an office bearer, not just simply an ordinary DA member, but someone in the leading position, should have been excluded from that particular process if there was a legitimate tender process in the first place?
So I agree to the extent that there is possibilities of conflict in that space. I'm saying the way that these things are dealt with and all the time is issues of declaration, issues of transparency, and issues of fairness of the process.
Yusuf, I think Tony
is allowed to do business with anyone.
I said it.
However, the issue of that me, you, if we're all in communications, we should have the same comparative space with Tony to
okay, Fadil, this is the argument. Tony has a right to do business. Who are we to stop him from doing business if he wants to do business?
If he's doing competitively.
I think, first of all, we need to analyze...
Just to stop, but I mean, just one thing, and both of you, but I'll deal with you, Fadil, first. Resolve stated, prior to the tender being granted to it, that it faced an uncertain future with the introduction of new legislation which would have apparently destroyed its future business prospects. That's the argument on the other side that has been presented as to why Resolve, which is one of the companies of Tony Leon, was so adamant in getting involved in this whole process. But the argument is that what stops him from dealing with the provincial government? What stops Tony with the city for that particular matter?
I think it's a moral question. Tony Leon needs to decide that, and the DA needs to answer that question. It hinges a lot on immorality. First of all, let's go back to the process. I'm not certainly aware that process was transparent, and I don't think my comrade here, Pogiso, can be honest enough to say the process indeed was, and he can't prove that. Yeah, you look at Musi Maimane went to Israel, and he did this under very surreptitious in a very surreptitious manner, because when he actually denied the fact that he met with the Knesset and so on, and with Netanyahu. But at the end of the day, he was completely exposed.
Yeah, but just on Tony Leon, and then this is the issue, is that he's an ex-employee also of the city of Cape Town. The issue which I find problematic is that apparently he's to sit in his chair, and at 10 o'clock every day he tells people it's raining or it's not raining. I mean, what does he do?
Let's take a step back.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't mind, let's take a step back. Let's first question the process, because that is the heart of corruption.
Yeah.
I'm in contact with a particular gentleman who asked me to remain anonymous for now. And he has devised and done extensive research on this particular issue of water crisis and resolving the matter, and is a private consortium, and he can deliver the same thing that the Israelis can do for a tenth of the price. He was dismissed completely by the DA. Okay, so the DA has to now come back and say to us then, why was Tony Leon awarded the contract? Why not somebody else with better expertise? Because Tony Leon has got no expertise in water crisis. He's an ex-politician. He's a founder member of the DA. Can he put his CV on the table and tell us then clearly that his expertise lies in resolving the water crisis? He can't.
Well, that's the point. Well, what is his expertise?
His expertise is communications, and
but
that's what Resolve was doing. The team was a multidisciplinary team. He was dealing, the company Resolve was dealing with the
Then why
communications
did he
around.
Well, why
deny-
didn't they point you? Why didn't they point you, Fadil, or myself? I could have sat and said there's no rain today. Basically, the water crisis. Because what was he doing?
So
What was his process? The point is, how do you pay a company 650,000 rand to tell you there's no rain?
It is a severe oversimplification to say that.
Well, explain the process. Explain the
I'm saying,
process.
not a communication specialist. I'm not. But,
Sure.
But communications as a field is a field we need to respect.
Yeah.
But you have your PRO
that has
desk to do
companies
that.
that has expertise in terms of designing the messaging, the strategy, the means, the media, all of that.
Understandable.
It's a professional space
Understandably.
with
but-
professionals.
Sure.
That's
But
part of
that's
branding.
that process. Yeah,
That's
branding.
part of branding. But the DA's got a PRO desk who does that.
Couldn't they
So
have
why
done that?
couldn't they have done that?
So are you saying to me that ITV would never go out to say we expanding, let's talk to a broadcasting company and say what is the best?
Sure, they have the right to do that. They
That's
have
what-
the-
that's
but
the
this is a
point.
private
You-
company.
Everyone does that.
It's a private company.
But-
You guys are accountable to government, to the public, and that's taxpayers' money.
I agree.
So now here's the situation. I understand the issue about branding. The issue of communication requires a certain degree of expertise.
It is a professional field.
Does it justify the city of Cape Town to pay 650,000 rands for the work that was basically to tell people there's no crisis? I mean, how do you justify
the issue we have
figure?
here is that the work was done by Tony Leon, which is a legitimate issue.
Yeah.
If it was done by company, why?
The figure would be- the
it'll
figure
still
would be
fine.
the figure would be
Yeah,
exorbitant.
because I'm saying, well, yes, we'll come to the figure, because I'm saying that the requirement of a communication strategy was determined by the city council that we require a communication strategy here. And then they took the steps to then engage a commercial company with expertise in the area to do it. It could have been...
What was the work? What did it entail? That's the issue. What did it entail that justified that amount?
So my understanding of
Do
the
you
issue
find it
is that-
problematic?
is that it... So in terms of valuating whether the work is valued at 650,000,
Yeah.
that is a very subjective discussion to have. What I'm saying to you is that a communication strategy was required. That's why it was priced. And whether we got value for money or not is something that we will debate.
Do you
for a
think
long
we got
time.
value
But
for money?
but
Do
it
you
was
think we
required.
got value
I
for
feel
money?
that we have reversed the water crisis situation in Cape Town, and all efforts that were put in there, we got value for money.
Fadil, has the water crisis been reversed? I mean, was there a water
We-
crisis
we-
in
we
the
sitting
first...
at 40% dam
but yeah,
levels.
but was a water crisis I mean, Limpopo, for example, many of these provinces in the north of South Africa, Thohoyandou, these regions, they've got a legitimate water crisis. There's no water coming out of the taps. Did Cape Town have a legitimate water crisis?
Yusuf, they may have had, because there was, in fact, a drought crisis. But what baffles me is that this earth is, the composition of the earth is 75% water and 25% land. Cape Town is, is landlocked around sea. And to have a desalination program done on the shores of Cape Town should be so much less costly and much more efficient than, say, for example, Limpopo that you've mentioned, which is inland. And so there are many questions surrounding this whole thing, but I need to come back to the Tony Leon issue and saying, surely there are many other communication specialists better qualified than him, number one. Number two, the process was not fair and equitable. Number three, the DA is denying that, because Tony Leon was questioned and he himself acknowledged or uttered something to the effect that he's not involved in this. In the meantime, when further research proved that he's actually indeed the director of this particular company. So that already smacks with collusion, already from the offset. And then finally, I'm questioning my comrade here from the DA and asking him that surely you have a communication specialist, surely you have a PRO, surely you have a communication desk. Is it necessary to have Tony Leon there, pay him almost R750,000 rand just to make an announcement, sitting back on a chair and say, look, a 15-minute announcement or pronouncement, which is something surely your PRO can handle?
I feel like it's very sad.
You
that
are wasting
it's sad
taxpayers'
that-
money.
and it's wrong that we reduce a professional field of PR communication to that people that sit and send emails. That's what we're saying about the entire profession.
Not at all.
I'm saying that.
Not at all.
That's what we're saying, because
No.
we require a communication strategy from a reputable company in the space. It could have been company Y or Z.
Was Leon a communications expert?
No, he was an executive director of a company
That was involved in
was in the
communications,
space. I can be
right.
the executive director of any company.
Sure.
There are professionals in the space. I'm saying it was a professional service that we paid a professional fee. The issue we have is the moral issue.
To the wrong person.
But he was involved in the process, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. No.
Was he not involved in
No,
the
he wasn't,
process?
no.
So the people
It is a
Behind the
city.
scenes, he
Behind
was
the scenes,
involved.
yeah.
None of us can say that with absolute certainty.
Well, he's on record as
Can we sit
acknowledging
Yusuf and say
this.
that?
He's on record as denying it in the first instance, and then
And then he
afterwards.
admitted. Why the denial
acknowledging it.
initially? If this was so kosher, to use a word, why did he engage in a sense of denialism and then admission? I mean, if there's nothing to hide in the first place, surely there needs to be there's an inconsistency in his approach. If it's an open deal, legitimate tender, well, this is what we are doing. Why engage in hiding?
So I can't answer for Tony in that space, but what I can definitely say that there is definitely a moral question here.
There's a moral question.
Yeah, so that might have been why they're going back and forth. But
So
there is
you-
definitely a moral question
So you agree that there was-
whether or not I, as a youth leader, can and then one day I can just go and work from the city of Joburg. There is definitely that moral question, but there isn't a written line or law, and all of that is in a very fuzzy space.
But it hasn't
So
been
there is a
interrogated.
fuzzy space.
You agree that this aspect, the moral question, which you rightfully, it hasn't been interrogated by the DA. And don't you believe that should be done at some point? I mean, you're calling for, rightfully so, the almost endemic corruption within almost every single ANC-run municipality and government department that is there. Surely the same process should apply to you.
I definitely agree that. So there are two issues. First, let's separate the issue. The first issue is that a tangible step, proven corruption, has not been proved in this case. Right? We're discussing the moral issue.
Because it
Now-
hasn't been tested. It
No, no,
hasn't gone to court.
Yes, no, that's
it
fine. So
needs
we'll-
to be
we'll-
tested.
No, sure, for sure.
But the evidence is there. It's blatant.
No, 100%. So we'll allow that to be tested. Now, coming to the moral question, definitely as a society, we need to have that discussion at every level. And in particular, political parties that sit on and work with public funds.
I'm
We
happy-
definitely-
I'm happy
we
finally
definitely have to have the
acknowledges
moral,
this.
the
So
moral
there's
question.
an
I'm
admission
speaking
on
about the
your
moral
part.
There's
question.
an
So,
admission
moral-
finally.
ethical
I'm
perspective.
speaking specifically on the moral
Yeah.
question. I'm saying in terms of a proof of corruption and a tangible, going towards a tangible case of a legal definition of corruption, we do not have that in this case.
Well, I'm going
In
to come
the
back to
Tony
you
Lon-
and Yusuf
in
Fadil.
the Tony Lon case.
I'm going to come back to both of you after a short break, and we'll continue this discussion. We're going for a short break. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. You viewing I Beg to Differ, and with me in the studios are Pogiso, who is the DA Provincial Youth Leader, and Fadila Sen, a community activist. Welcome back to both of you. Just when we stopped, we were focusing on the issue of the water crisis. I mean, that in itself takes us to a whole range of sub-issues that I think in the course of the discussion, we don't obviously be able to do justice to it. So take you to something which has been raised in recent years, party funding. Generally speaking, and I'm not so sure what your restrictions are in terms of what you can communicate, but generally speaking, and this happens not just in South Africa in the local context, but internationally itself, is that the funders of the respective parties sometimes determine the public policy. You look at the United States with the Republicans and the Democrats, Republicans more leaning to the extreme right, Democrats supposedly center-right, allegedly left, but more particularly also heading towards the right. The Democratic Alliance has been talk in recent years that a lot of the funders of the DA, and it's going to take me to the next issue which you raise about Zionist influence, is that a lot of the individuals that have been involved in some capacity in relation to funding have obviously had particularly dubious international agendas. One particular example comes to mind as an individual called Nathan Kirsch. It was mentioned by the Daily Maverick and I believe by Newsweek, who was apparently a director and owner of Israel's Magal security systems, which was complicit in the construction of the apartheid wall. And apparently some talk that a lot of the funding comes from people that are very much supportive of the Israeli position on Palestine and in fact on the Zionist position in Palestine. What do you comment on that?
I think we are trying to relate two unrelated issues. So the issue of party funding is that any individual who believes in the values of the Democratic Alliance,
Sure.
freedom, fairness, and opportunity, believes in our manifesto, believes in what we're trying to achieve for the South African people, is always invited to come and help us achieve that mission. Their business relationship, unless it is proven to be criminal and they're convicted somewhere, which happened, for example, with the Guptas, who once gave us a donation before things happened, in 2011 for the local elections, before things then unraveled and we gave it back because it came to light, or their actions subsequent to that came through were not representative of who we are. Now, coming to people then with international links, our policy on the Israel-Palestinian situation is very clear. It is a part of what most international players in the space are calling for, which is the two-state solution and the finding of middle ground to allow the coexistence of Israel and Palestine. And then we do not, therefore, lean in any particular way on a particular side more heavily than on the other one.
The two-state solution is dead. I mean, basically, that's another debate on its own.
Yeah,
on
but that's who we are.
But the idea that Kirsch and a lot of these individuals were involved, I mean, shouldn't there be a public disclosure in terms of who funds political parties? I mean, it prevents the kind of allegation, because a lot of them suggest that these are just simply speculatory allegations, but it'll put to bed the allegations of influence of public policy. If the political parties, and I think the DA in many respects opposes the idea of basically the public having a degree of awareness in terms of who its funders are.
Yeah, so we do that because, so imagine you, Yusuf, were an IT entrepreneur who does work for the Department of Communications.
Yeah.
And but you do not believe in the way the current ANC government runs the space, and then you support the DA's view on the market economy and all of that. You fund our campaigns. Now, imagine that now comes into light, and there's this whole list of publications to say, no, Yusuf is one of the main funders. And then what will then happen, or the chance, the risk of now your relationship with the Department of Communications run by the ANC,
but I mean,
in terms of your enterprise. So we're saying that
I'm a private individual. In that concept, I mean, there are strategies to challenge that. You can take them to the Department of Labor. But what I'm saying is we're not dealing with a situation where a member of the ANC is now funding the DA. We're dealing with outside. I mean, where funds basically reach a certain proportion, a large, significant proportion. I understand there are a lot of funders, but certain funders donate more than others.
Yeah.
Surely there needs to be a degree of transparency in respect of that.
So we're saying
what's the fear? The fear.
So we're saying that level of exposure for the private citizens that fund will most likely either prejudice those people in whatever other actions that they do in society. You will know that political parties are so they make us differ a lot. So if you support a particular party, you support a particular view of the world. Your other interactions with people that support different parties, which may be private and enterprise interactions, may be affected by that.
But isn't it the other way around?
So we don't want that to happen.
Isn't it the other way around? Okay, so it's the other way around generally in many instances.
Yeah.
Is that the actual political parties' positions on public policy are more often than not influenced by its funders. Because here's the situation. The funders don't rely on the DA or the ANC for that matter. The ANC and the Democratic Alliance rely on the funders. So if the company or the party doesn't toe the line or the policy leaning of the funder, that fund's going to drive. But this is a point. It's an important point. Just to clarify this issue is that if you're afraid that your funding will dry up, and there's a significant amount of funding, certainly, even if that individual is a pro-Israeli supporter or has been involved in other nefarious activities, you're gonna accordingly, if it's secretive, there's nothing that prevents you from toeing the line of the funder, because the funder doesn't rely on the party relies on the funder.
No. So that's the political parties like the DA have three sources of funding. So one is the membership fees of members and donation of members.
Which is small, it's a small amount.
Which is smallish. Then there is the proportional funding depending on the number of seats you have. that comes from the IEC. And then there are then those individual donors and companies and sponsors who believe in our mission. Now, the mission of a political party is set through its structures, in its congresses, in its policy, which are all open to public. Our last congress was open to public when we adopted diversity as a principle and we adopted all of these things. There was no, people were literally voting, raising their voting cards. I'm not saying the funders are not speaking to us. I'm saying that the assessment of their influence is totally incorrect, and it is not as heavily proportionate as you speak.
Yusuf,
would you agree with that?
Funders coming to support our mission.
I would completely differ with that.
What would you take beyond that?
First of all, the one who pays the piper calls the tune. We know that, right? Secondly, in reality, it doesn't work like that, because I need to ask Pogiso here one question only. Let's assume this is my profile. I'm a big gangster in Cape Town. I'm a murderer. I'm a rapist. I get my acquisition of my business funding in a very immoral way. Mm-hmm. And I come to you and I said, I've got 100 billion rand. Will you accept my donation?
We don't want it.
You don't want it?
Yeah. If you're
a
proven criminal.
That's double standards, because you're doing that with the terrorists. You accept their funding. They feed terrorism. The Jewish Board of Deputies, the Zionist Federation of South Africa, they feed terrorism.
The point is that your position
has
been
big jump there from a...
Yeah, you see, I understand your personal position may be different. But it's related in the sense that the position on the DEA, certainly has kind of shifted in recent years, but it has always been very much restrained in terms of coming out strongly in condemning the Israeli military, the IDF, and in the state of Israel. It's never, in the time of Tony Leon, it was totally absent. Now, certainly,
in fact, it was pro.
It was pro-Israel. Now, of course, there appears to be some degree of neutrality, but again, somewhat restrained. I had a member of a guest from the Democratic Alliance in Durban who I wanted to call on the Israeli-Palestinian issue.
Yeah.
Prominent individual in the religious community, as well as a member of the DA. Yeah. Very much hesitant in coming out and commenting on the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Why the point being made is that there may possibly be a link between funding and the public international position on the Israeli-Palestinian issue.
It's not possibly. It's a firm confirmation that there is a link. We know many businesses that we can mention.
Such as?
Branded names. What's this guy? The cheapest, it just eludes me now. Very prominent guy in Cape Town.
The Oppenheimers or the...
Not necessarily the Oppenheimers, but they sell these hunting tools. I forgot the name now, sorry. But, and so there are many others who also support that. International branded names as well, Nike, Adidas, they've just colluded now with massive deals as well. And they're funding the Zionist operations. And I'm saying this entire thing, what my colleague here is saying, my learned colleague, is not exactly true. Because I've cited an example that assuming my profile, I'm a big gangster in Cape Town, a big immoral rapist, etc., a person who oppress women and children and do trafficking, he said outrightly, you will not accept my funding.
Yeah, well, he may not, but the point is his party may.
His party will. And they do. They actually
No, but how do you know that? The point is how the fact that it's secretive. Surely that's a main reason. That's a main point why it should not be made secretive. Why funding should not be secretive. Because what's there to prevent? What kind of backup mechanisms do you have to ensure that cannot happen?
Let's take one example: the desalination project that they've got. They got a kickback of 600 million. So maybe he needs to comment on that.
Well, I'm going to come on that. I'm going to get you back. I need you to comment on that. We're just going for a quick ad break, and then we're going to wrap up the situation.
Okay.
We'll be back shortly. Well, we're back. The program is I Beg to Differ, and we've been having a hard, heated debate on the whole notion of corruption. And with me in the studios are Pogiso and Fadil, who've happily engaged me. Pogiso, just before we went for the break, I think the point made on the, and we're going to move on the issue of funding, is that certainly this is an issue where moral compromises and lapses can occur, particularly if it's done in secretive fashion.
For sure.
And as a member of the ANC, of the DA Youth League, you're not going to be necessarily privy to some of the highfalutin funding processes that
Yeah.
would be in place. As a youth leaguer, there'll be certain limitations in terms of what information you can have access to.
That's true.
And I'm saying, shouldn't this be all the more reason why it needs to be in the public sphere, particularly, not necessarily with small contributions and donations, but particularly with massive donations?
So I think
I mean, ideally, shouldn't that be the position? If you were the leader tomorrow, which could possibly happen
Yeah.
sometime in the future,
Yeah.
shouldn't that be the realm you should go?
I think in a society where we declare that the choices that Yusuf makes does not prejudice him in terms of other things that he does in his private life, that's definitely, and that's something that we should all work towards. And in this case, should this, I mean, this is already a determination of the Constitutional Court that that's what needs to be done. So we then need to come to a point where we see then how do we then deal with the possible loss of donations to political parties, either through increased IEC funding or in other ways, in order to ensure that our mission goes through. So there's no problem with that.
I'll tell you why.
We don't have a problem with that.
I'll tell you why the link, because it was remarkable, and particularly coming from a Democratic Alliance councillor, a black councillor, Mpho Palatsi. And why I say black councillor? Because generally, black population in this country have been very much oppressed
Yes.
and certainly support they still are, and they support the Palestinian struggle. But this was one point made. Obviously, she was taken to task, but this was a tweet made by Mpho Palatsi. She stated in a tweet, she was a Democratic Alliance councillor, "I would like to declare that I am a friend of Israel and the city of Johannesburg is a friend of Israel. Shalom, shalom." Now, that was what she tweeted some time back. And then in response, there was a tweet, "Your DA is falling apart at the seams. We have friends who are inside your party and cannot wait to find a way to destroy your hateful party coming soon." Now, certainly the National Ruling Party condemned Palatsi's comments, but the point is the existence of such pro-Israeli comments by someone that comes from the oppressed community. I mean, it's a bit of it's an aberration unless there's something more that's involved.
Doesn't the act by the party to condemn that and by Herman Mashaba to...
By Herman Mashaba
doesn't it deal with the whole conversation?
But the point is Herman Mashaba's position...
Because we're not pro-Zionists.
But Herman Mashaba's positions in many respects have been not necessarily in line with the Democratic Alliance on issues of land claims.
But the party itself spoke on this issue.
In fact, the EFF have claimed him as their mayor compared to what the DA have said.
I personally like Herman. Very progressive.
Now, certainly, you may like Herman.
Yeah.
A lot of members in the
person.
party may see him as someone that is inherently problematic, more left-leaning, more socialist in his. But I mean, the point is that these tweets that in fact exist raise certain concerns. I mean, we don't have this too much amongst the ruling party, although their public policy may tell us elsewhere. But the fact that someone can so brazenly, as a councillor, DA councillor, make this tweet becomes problematic.
Can I come in there and answer that?
Yeah, Fadil, just quickly.
The point is that is precisely a reflection that's endemic within the DA.
No way.
It is definitely
I'll come to you shortly on that.
A reflection of that. Because where does she come with that kind of positioning, like you've described earlier on in your introduction on this point, that blacks are being largely oppressed and still are.
They still are.
Yeah, and mostly they have support for
Not
the
just Palestine, but all
issue.
struggles around the world.
Because
South American
we
and
come
various
from the same kind of political oppression, in our old apartheid days. So it is very ironic and quite strange that she had come up with this kind of thinking. What would want a progressive young person in South Africa want to think like this in a very progressive democracy?
And this just takes me to Musi Maimane's visit. I want you to comment and I'm going to bring you in. At the time that he made the visit, the UN Security Councils made an immediate resolution at that point in time as well, demanding immediate end to Israeli settlement construction, which, it's ongoing and endemic. Maimane ventured to the Middle East to a completely allegedly naive, he's a politician, about the consequences of listening and learning. And I think Pumzile van Dam stated that his whole aim was to go and neutrally learn about what was happening. What do you say about that? I mean, a politician, someone that's come with a theology background, doesn't know what's happening in Israel?
Yusuf, you've actually...
And then he tweets a picture. If Hitler was around, would you have? Well, I'll come back to that on that analogy. But how do you explain that?
You've stolen my thunder, basically, because at the end of the day, I mean, this guy is a man of the cloth. he should know.
His fellow Christians are being oppressed in Israel.
Absolutely, and I mean it's actually from biblical times. If you look at Ezekiel 36,
Yeah, sure.
verse 18 to 21, God had condemned them for the Israelites for their arrogance and their haughtiness.
Yeah,
and
I
they
don't
were
get into
punished.
theology, but his visit to Israel, what does it tell you?
Well, basically, it's an endorsement of support for the
What
Zionist
would you
regime.
say? Would you say that? How do you explain? I mean, let's reverse the situation. You had someone like Slobodan Milosevic, Saddam Hussein, or worst, Adolf Hitler. If they were around and Musi Maimane went and stood and shook their hands and tweeted a picture, would that not be viewed as totally condemnatory? Would he do the same thing with the North Korean leader, with some of the leaders in the world? I mean, the fact that he brazenly shook the hands of Netanyahu, that clearly has blood on his hands, surely it's a shameless activity. Wouldn't you agree with me?
We still have this country ruled by the ANC, a liberation organization, still has diplomatic relations.
Yeah, but we want to
with
cut
Israel.
them off. We want to cut them off.
We still
Should we
have,
not cut them off?
So what I'm trying to say to you is that to solve global conflicts, a very intricate conflict that is the whole world is trying to understand in Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, but it's not intricate.
It involves that listen to both sides. It involves trying to bring both sides together to the table. It does not involve just sitting and condemning one side and not coming and reaching out to the other side to reach the center.
What is your position?
So you need to go there. You need to go and understand the nature of the conflict, see it for your own eyes.
But he
then be
denied
able
it.
to develop
But
a
could he
position.
not see it?
He denied
Could he
this.
not see it? What did he deny?
He denied the fact that he actually went there to, he didn't say went there to investigate. He went under false pretext. And then he also denied to shaking hands or meeting Netanyahu.
Yeah, that's the other point, that he initially denied that, and then there was an about turn and the picture was tweeted
Correct.
in the public
Yeah,
eye.
correct.
Now why
Only then.
deny that? The point again, showing lies by politicians.
Of course.
And I mean, the problem that I have here is that where do you draw the moral ground here? I mean, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not as complex in the sense that it's clear what's happening. There's a theft of land, there's killing of children, there's mass murder. I mean, can people not see that?
So why hasn't the whole world solved it already?
Well, the problem is because of the support struggle. It hasn't been sorted. It hasn't been solved. The
economic relations.
So how can the
I
DA?
suppose because of the funding
So
of the
Musi
Zionists.
Maimane visiting Netanyahu and shaking his hand, how would it have solved the problem? How would it solve it? He never ended up meeting with the Palestinian Authority, and we can speak about the corruption within the Palestinian Authority, but he met Netanyahu. He never visited Gaza.
He attempted to meet the Palestinian Authority.
He attempted to meet, but
So let's correct
I don't think he visited the actual occupied territories, as I understand it. He could have gone there. He never went to the occupied territories, and the aim was to kind of improve diplomatic relations. And how can you improve diplomatic relations with a state that openly is engaging in genocide?
I think that was a business
because we will even disarm nuclear powers, solve the difficult conflict in Syria and all over the world through diplomatic relations.
But you're not the ruling
relations.
party. The point is the DA is not the ruling party. How did the DA attempt to want to get involved in solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by Maimane going and sitting on the table
Because
with
as the main
Netanyahu?
opposition party, one of our biggest purposes is to give an alternative of what the state would be if it was run by different
Yeah, but
parties.
how is
So
alternative
even on our foreign policy, we need to be able to show
so how is
that
your-
this is what our view would be on
What
foreign
would you?
policy.
But the point is that's the whole point. Shaking the hands of a mass murderer. What would the view of the DA be? He shook the hands of the mass murderer. I mean, can't we at least? I mean, yourself, you seem to be a man of integrity.
Yeah.
Don't you think that the question, or at least, I don't want you to condemn your own leader. Don't you think that the actual action of Maimane was inherently problematic?
I feel like from both of you, calling Netanyahu a mass murderer is a bit of posturing. It's definitely posturing.
No,
Is that posturing?
There is
Is that posturing?
He's
No,
on
it's
record,
definitely-
it is
he's on
definitely
record
posturing.
as killing
But I mean, he's on record of
No, it is
stating
definitely
and
posturing.
justifying the
Can
killing
never
of
be. What
innocent
posturing
Palestinians.
can there
Look,
be?
I mean, as I said, for me, why the conflict is intricate. Let's take, for example, the last incident. We were told that the information, depending on who you're listening to, was that the PLO or some of the what they call terrorists from the Palestinian side tried to get over the line and put
Freedom fighters,
kids and
not
children
terrorists.
Yeah, but
and all of that. So there is a very intricate.
The point is,
there's intricate information depending on who you listen to.
I want to wrap up this discussion.
Who do you listen
I want
to?
to wrap up the discussion. Do you agree Palestinian children are being killed by Israelis?
Yes.
And do you believe that Israelis are engaged in constant theft of land and increased land settlements?
No.
So
I
the
believe that
DA's position is
I believe that
the
there's-
DA's position is that despite
There
the
is-
UN
people are dying.
resolution,
People are dying, yes.
but despite the UN resolutions that the land occupations and theft of land has to stop, the DA's position is that there's no theft of land in Israel.
The DA's position is that a two-state solution.
A two-state solution is a failure. It's a total
going.
failure. It won't work now. There needs to be a single-state solution. But I don't want to get involved. Just
okay,
last minute. Time's running
Yeah.
up. Last minute. 1 minute for deal. One minute. I'll leave you with 1 minute. 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Yusuf, I think the DA is dishonest. And I think honestly that their foreign policy is not what they say it is.
Yeah.
They masters at PROing and branding the DA, and the whole intention is to muster votes. I think Musimamani's, there's evidence of him being dishonest. The DA is going to lose votes, and that's the bottom line.
Last word by you.
So-
30 seconds.
So the DA is an organization that believes in the freedom of individuals, the freedom of societies, and self-determination. And we will fight for that wherever we go. But the battle for that will not be made when people are making enemies of each other.
Okay, I have to stop you on that, Pakiso. Thank you very much. It's been great having you as a guest. Fadil, always a pleasure to have you as a guest. We hope to have more interactive sessions in the future. And it's been a lively debate. And thank you to you, the viewer, for watching us. The program is I Beg to Differ. This is a program which focuses on interactive, hard-hitting debate where we leave no stones unturned. And join us next week for more debate on I Beg to Differ. This is Yusuf Ismail. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.